is the beginning of the Imperium Podcastium Redux 3. Wait, 3? So with your host, me, Tony, just me, because I fucked up last night. Anyways, today our guests would be Theo and
Hi.
Snake, and yes, those. I mean, and with the guest like from Megs, who will be just answering questions from Tayo and me and Snake and all that about living world and whenever it applies. Anyway, so
Hi.
our topic list today would be about upcoming about game worlds, and our first topic would be upcoming guests by our upcoming games by our guests, Snake and Tio. That's it. um who of you two wants to begin first?
Oh, by the way, I'm Southern King on CFC. If you weren't aware of that.
Indeed.
Yes, Southern King.
You can take the stage first if you want. Snack.
All right. So, how do you want me to do this? Do you just want me to start describing it?
Tony.
Oh, what? Wasn't Snake going to start talking about his
Yeah.
game?
Should I just start describing it?
Go ahead. What's it about? What's the main idea? Is it an out history? Is it a fantasy game?
So, it's my upcoming game is basically a Cold War game in an alternate history Cold War. Basically, the idea I had going into it was to create a Cold War scenario where both of the real life Cold War powers, the U.S. and Russia, were neutered as much as physically possible. So what I ended up doing is created an alternate history where the U.S. gets absolutely slaughtered in the War of 1812, and so basically from there, it starts in 1950. By that time, basically everything is different.
All right.
So
So, you go ahead. All right.
what?
You are going to say something, but then I kind of interrupted you.
Oh, okay. So that's a quick question. Can you give us some examples of countries that are dramatically different than what they are in our timeline?
Yeah, sure. So I can give you there are basically three great powers or three superpowers, whatever. By this point in the timeline, one is the Franco-British Union, which is basically a union of Britain and France. In this timeline, Britain, just like France, underwent revolution in 1848, and slowly the two revolutionary countries, especially after the collapse of the British Empire at that same time, um, they eventually grew closer together, and by the early 20th century, um, basically created political union. The other great powers are Mexico, which in this timeline has become technocratic, which was a real life ideology, but never was significant. And in this case, it's kind of um, I've described it to people as fascist Italy without the nationalist elements. And third great power is Japan, which is in this timeline is kind of democratic socialist and currently is dominant in Asia. And so other countries include an Ottoman Empire, which has survived and is actually pretty prosperous and fairly multicultural. And uh, Argentina is fairly powerful and politically stable. Uh, there's a country called the East India Dominion, which is basically the remnants of the British East India Company after a kind of Sepoy Mutiny type event. But the remnants of the East India Company reorganized and now control most of India. And there are other pretty powerful countries, something called the Imperium Federation, which is sort of a Polish nationalist dream almost, and basically has after the last war is basically partitioned Russia and is currently the dominant power in Eastern Europe, and also has nuclear weapons.
All right, cool.
Yeah. So I know you can tell us a lot about the history of the game, and well, I also know that you're not very interested in such questions, but how exactly does your game work? I mean, the stats and all that.
Yeah, I'm more of like I'm a lot better at, like, I enjoy world building a lot more than I enjoy doing stats, so I haven't really done much of the stats yet. But I do know there'll definitely be nuclear weapons because this is the Cold War. I think I have a way to make them work without the game imploding in on itself, like nuclear weapons tended to do in the past. Um, Beyond that, I know like influence and shit will be really important. Uh, like foreign influence, and like I do want to make it a more like internal politics based game than like just pure war, because I think that suits the period better, and also I think like I'd enjoy modding that kind of game better. But like I can't tell you anything specific like this is what stats are going to look like. Not at this stage anyway.
All right. I believe that one of the more interesting parts about next game, which it is on chat, was the DEFCON system, which will be different than most games set in that time periods. Can you tell us all about it?
Yeah, so it's not so much a DEF CON system as it is like, um, if you are aware of the Doomsday Clock in real life, it's more closely related to that. Basically, if you're not familiar with this, it's basically a clock that's published that was published by a magazine of like atomic scientists. Basically, the clock would showed how close the world was to nuclear war at any given point. And if the clock at midnight, then that would mean uh, mutually assured destruction occurred and nuclear war. So the idea is that I will be having some similar clock that ticks up or down depending on how world tensions are at any given moment. And so countries are not allowed to use nuclear weapons unless the clock is beyond a certain point. I still haven't figured out the exact details, so don't take that 100% literally, but it'll work something like that.
Would the clock hitting midnight be instant game over, or you're planning to push the game even after the brutal nuclear war that devastates the entire planet?
Well, you'll probably just have to wait and see to find out, because I do have plans for what happens after that. But also, like, I should say that the clock doesn't stop you from trying to get nuclear weapons. That you can do anyway, but you just can't use them.
All right. So, do you have anything else to add to your game?
Uh, Beyond that, not. I can't think of anything in particular, though.
Well,
Uh,
Mextio, do you have any questions for him?
I'm no, I don't really have anything that comes to mind.
Well, I guess this means it's your turn to
Hey,
talk.
hey,
hey, Megs.
Megs.
Hey.
I, I have a question.
Yes, sure.
Um, so how are you going to simulate all of the espionage that happened during the Cold War.
Right. So I do have plans for an espionage system where like it will happen in the background without player input as long as like the player puts money into it. I don't know the exact details at this point, but I do know that will play a role in the game. Sorry, that probably wasn't the answer you were looking for.
Yeah, I was looking more for how do I overthrow everybody.
Yeah, so like you'll definitely be able to do that.
They have pigs every day.
Hey,
Okay, then. I guess I'll go on to mine then.
Sure.
I mean, if you have anything else to say, I don't want to cut you off.
Like I was going to say that would also tie into like foreign influence. So if you have a lot of influence in a country that like you don't like the direction it's going in, you can step in and obviously, if you're a great power. If you're not, then this is the shit you'll have to deal with because.
All right. Wait. So, just to make sure I got that what you just said correctly. So basically, the espionage system is basically a background thing that'll like play into like certain world events so long as you put money into it, and I suppose some sort of directive like, hey, overthrow this, here's money. But like the great powers can do a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I mean, like the great powers are the great powers and the secondary powers, which are like in this case are like the Ottomans, Poland, etc. Like I described, are the ones that'll be able to use like foreign influence and get influence on our countries. But espionage will be like espionage is kind of different from that. But
Okay,
sorry,
I think I gotcha.
well, so Tayo, well, I guess it's your turn now again for the third time, I think.
All right, sure. So my game coming up, I don't like. Well, I say coming up. I'm not sure when it'll be released. But I made some significant progress. But anyways, my game is called Requiem of Another World, and if that sounds familiar, it somewhat should, so long as you've actually played this old game. Oldish game. I had this game called Song of Another World, and that basically took place in medieval Europe in the 12th century. Basically, at some point in the 12th century, some sort of weird cosmic event happens, and that causes like change in the the physics of like the world, and so you have things coming up like demonic looking beasts, I guess depending on your perspective anyways, beasts that terrorize different towns. They're directly responsible for the collapse of several of the kingdoms of old medieval Europe. You have new resources coming up, which I will talk about some more later on. And yeah, like people started to obtain like powers. No specific examples that comes to mind, but whatever comes to mind there will probably be like a thing that is explored. So in my previous game, I was basically having players in a very traditional IoT sense, like play countries. The economic system was much different than what you'd expect from IoTs at this point, but the whole baseline, like, hey, you're playing the leaders of a country, and you're good luck. In this iteration, it's basically the same thing, though I have taken out some of the player. Basically, some players have did some world building in their signups. They were mostly pretty neat, but the thing is, they kind of constrain. Sorry about that. I can't really help that, but anyways. Excuse me. Where was I?
You're talking about player-controlled nations?
Right. Okay, so in this iteration, Players are controlling like people, like their specific avatar, in the world, similar to how another one of my old games played, A New Age, where players had their specific character, and like that character had like significant clout and stuff. So players are basically, they start out with this character, and their character is what's known as a special character, and that just means basically they have a special power. Now this power, I'm actually planning, like, for right now anyways, I am planning to have basically, you create your character minus the power, and my interpretation of that character and your respective stats will determine what your power is. So like, I select the power, but like characters can influence it. I mean, players can influence it like via their sign up. So the intricacies of this, like, so there's like a bunch of ways of progression in this. You can climb a political ladder, or you can literally just try to better your powers and like your physical capabilities. Not really with regard to your political clout. You can just straight up level yourself up and become a force, like kind of like a force of nature at that point. And like other things like that. Like there's pretty much you can take it any direction you want to. Really, you can become a scientist who's like really interested in learning like what's going on in this world, or you can be a leader, or the earliest sprout of a capitalist in this world, and like try to control the world's markets and stuff. So that's like the kind of general overview. Is there any like questions or anything?
Is it true that this is just basically Ruby in medieval Europe?
No, it's not. Like, I did take some inspiration from it, specifically with the whole like somewhat to how the creatures behave, but not quite. The character powers definitely, but like, for example, I talked about special resources in the original game. There were resources that were like more akin to what something in Ruby was, but in this one, I have completely different resources. For example, I'm going to have a resource that sprouts up that's basically a metal that grows via organic matter. So like
Tiberium?
What?
That sounds like Tiberium.
I have played that game, but I don't really I don't really know too much about the lore, to be honest. But I guess basically it kind of latches on to well like it's found in a certain area, and it'll start like growing on organic matter and eventually consume it.
That is literally Tiberium.
Okay, then it's Tiberium apparently. That's one. Like it's like a kind of metal that you can temper into a more useful, less it'll kill you if you touch it sort of way. And another one would be excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. So where was I? The other like another material I was thinking about was basically it's kind of like a kind of stone that's on fire, but not really. It basically like renders everything around it completely useless, and it doesn't grow in the same manner as the other material. It kind of just like where it exists, and it kind of destroys everything else around it.
Oh, all right. So, if I may interrupt you.
Sure.
So you're talking about resources, but it's a character-based game. So I'm curious, how would it really work? Like, it seems like the first several turns will be focused on characters, and like I don't see a point of having resources while playing as characters.
Well, the resources aren't like kind of like they're kind of like they're sort of like if you are any familiar of Stellaris' newest update, they're sort of like those those strategic resources, or in Civ, those strategic resources where like you have a pool of those resources, and then you can use them to forge equipment and stuff. So they're not like they're not like you have hundreds of units of these things. They're more like you have a mine. You have a mine that like produces one of these things per turn, and then you can like set it to, like to be sold, or you can try to use it for research or something like that. The character-based element, like it is a like integral part of the game. So like basically how it begins, like in terms of like a player's perspective, is like you make your character, and now your character's out in the world. You'll have like a base amount of gold to start with, and some equipment that I'll give you depending on like your profession and stuff. And then I'll let all the players know of their powers, and then they're pretty much free to do whatever they want. And that can be like, let's go out and make a name for yourself by like joining a mercenary band, or maybe just go at it solo and like start to turn, like, because when you first get your power, you basically have the ability to turn to already like turn world events on its head. Be that like your presence can affect the outcome of a battle pretty much just from the start of it. So, yeah.
Are there going to be NPC characters or nations like would they be stupid and stuff or and whatnot?
Yes, but it's kind of limited. So basically, there'll be some like the only NPCs I'll keep track of are those that are of serious note. Also, can you hear my background very like is my background very pronounced or no?
Kinda.
Not really.
I can't hear much of anything aside from your voice.
Okay, cool. So, going on. Well, they're just talking about Jesus Christ.
NPCs.
Right, NPCs. So basically, like my goal for that is basically to only model special like. Basically, there's two kinds of characters. This is outlined in the rules as well, but I'll just go over that. There are special characters and mundane characters, and like it's kind of pretty intuitive. Special characters are basically anyone with a high amount of power, and it can't just be any average like lord. They have to have a lot of power. Be that by a real special power, or just like they are literally the Holy Roman Emperor. And like only those characters are modeled. Regular like lord, a regular lord of like a local estate isn't really that like as it's not as notable. So those characters won't be modeled. They'll be like thrown under the mundane characters. A lot of characters will be thrown under there. In the end, I believe to start out with, there'll be like around 13 max NPCs that like you can like directly interact with as like a character.
Alright, so I think probably saw some of the more meme responses to your high post in the IO death threat, and should ask how like diverse the setting will be, because the way I understand it, it seems that it mostly works by like having Japan in Sweden or something, and how much creative freedom are you going to allow people?
Well, another part of the event is that space became temporarily distorted, and that caused particular locations to switch places. And as I like kind of hinted at in the dev thread, and that you mentioned, like you'll have some like Japanese villages in the north in Scandinavia, and you can also find some Indian villages where Santiago de Compostela used to be. Compesta.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
SK's idea.
Yes, that was SK's idea. Thanks, SK. Like this entire point is actually all SK's doing because he wanted to be an Indian thing, and I'm like, at first I was iffy, but in the end, I decided that'd be pretty cool, and so now. Not only do we have these cultures there, but they're also represented in like the different things that are like available in particular places. So, for example, in Western Europe, which is where they're in Iberia, and Iberia is in the Western Europe, like little what do you call it? Like a kind of sector that I made there. You can find Indian weapons and armor there. In addition to some like religious artifacts, because that's another thing in the game. Like you can find artifacts or buy artifacts off if you pay enough money, and these artifacts are somewhat important as well, in the same way that kind of resources are. So yeah, like in terms of creativity, like it's pretty open ended. I don't want like people to like still like kind of break where the places are. So like I don't want like a Danish person in the middle of Greece, but as long as like it's consistent with what I've created in the world, and like I'll outline where everything is. I'm currently creating like a kind of codex where it'll tell you like what's known about certain areas and resources and stuff, and that's kind of like how the research is gonna work actually. So in the codex, there'll be like certain places with question marks that are highlighted in like yellow or something, and these question marks outline somewhere to be like things are not known in this particular area. So, for example, the Indian like villages and stuff that has a question mark somewhere in that context, and so if you're playing as an Indian, like that's still relevant, like. The question mark kind of denotes like these two groups know nothing about each other. So like the Indians that now live in Spain have no idea about like the they have very little idea about the Europeans living there, and vice versa. So there's always like it's not like there's something that you can't do if you're a particular if your characters derive from a particular culture. Yeah.
Will Sweden still be pagan?
All around the world, religious dissonance is kind of going to be more pronounced in this world in general. So yes, like I'm planning basically to have a bunch of places like that. I'll just like you'll see a revitalization of paganism just in general.
But will Sweden stay pagan in this timeline? Because it's never converted.
That's completely up to the to the players. Like that, like it'll start out pretty much disposed to like paganism, but like
I don't think you're really answering the question still.
Maybe I don't understand the question 100%.
Well, you kept SK's nation as is. Are you going to be keeping my Sweden in the backstory? It never converted to Christianity in the first place.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I like a lot of the inspiration like that I took out. Like there are some things that I won't be incorporating. Like from my last game, there are some things that I really liked like a lot. For example,
what aren't you including?
So for example, there was Angst's kind of heretical thing going on. I don't believe it was really a cult. I believe it was like a heresy of Christianity that he started in the middle of the HRE. I don't think I'll have that, at least that not in that form. I will have like some different religious dissonance in the HRE, but it won't be specifically that. Just as an example, really, I haven't decided like in total what to keep and what to axe. So like. Currently, like my biggest, the place I've worked on the most is Western Europe, France, Spain, and I have an idea for what I want to like happen in Scandinavia. Like for example, like I said, I'm planning to throw in some Japanese villages up north somewhere, and in Britain I'm planning to do something there too. But in specific, like I haven't gotten all the details down.
All right. I think that we should probably move on because, like, yeah,
Sure.
enough about Charles' game. Sorry. So the next topic in line would be settings, the most popular and why. Why some settings are liked and why are some disliked. First off, I would begin like, as you know, I am hosting Arcanum and I have encountered a number of people who have said, "Nah, I don't like fantasy settings," and this made me wonder, but why? I mean, it's all like, mm, I don't quite understand it, and like, I think that well, maybe that's a bit too much thinking of me, but like, it was a fresh breath of air compared to all the games running in real life and all that, and in pretty much the same time period as well. So yeah, discuss, I guess.
Well, in regards to fantasy, I think my guess as to why a lot of people don't like it is because they don't like the fact that magic exists, or like the fact that the world's like I don't know, physics and stuff work differently from real life, and I guess some people just don't like having to relearn that. I don't know.
I think another issue is that a lot of fantasy settings are clearly Tolkien-esque. Now, a lot of people try to put their own unique spin to it.
Yeah, that too. I agree with that.
Well, yeah, I'm also kind of guilty of that as well. So, well, I was planning to try and explain the magic in hopes that this might well make people more like make them more desiring to join. I guess maybe because the magic's explained, it wouldn't be so much suspension of disbelief and all that. I guess.
I don't think that's really your fault because I know a lot of games are Tolkienesque because they take inspiration from D&D, which itself is pretty Tolkienesque, and so
Yeah, it's just what SK said. It's just I feel like people aren't necessarily against fantasy; they're just against the same fantasy tropes being done over and over again.
Um, I'm gonna say I disagree. I think that like it's more in line with like people are just aren't used to it really, like used to it as like a setting for an IoT. Give me a moment. So like, for example, like we do a lot of the same-ish stuff on IoT a lot as well, and no one's kind of and very rarely do people like say, "Hey, I'm tired of Victorian or medieval." Well, we don't actually do very many medieval settings, but like postmodern modern settings. But those are kind of like the most popular games though, and like you never really see them die down in terms of like or like people you don't really hear people complain about them really and how they're so pronounced. So I think it's really not because of like people are tired of the same tropes. I think it's the opposite. Like they're not very well versed in those worlds. Like they're more interested in like our world and its either near future or near past. Like, cause like I said, a lot of those games are the most popular games, and like a lot of them are just like kind of re-renditions of those games. Like Iron and Blood has been redone like not hundreds of times, but about a dozen times now, and like no one's tired of it. Everyone wants to join
once. Like
What?
just because it only ran once, just because a game is made doesn't mean it actually runs. And
But okay, so like Iron and Blood as a franchise.
these tropes aren't done a lot of times. The only game series that really seems to be done a lot are the standard number IoTs, and that's just because that's the thing that we were founded on. We don't really repeat settings that much at all, in fact.
I still don't see it because like, sure, Iron and Blood like only really ran very few times, but like even just looking at Iron and Blood like games, like any of Son's games, or like, um, and another example would be like Tenny's games would be like less Iron and Blood esque and more like of the modern sense. Like they're
Postmodern is the only one that's done a lot. I don't think there is a lot of Victorian games because I don't think many of the Victorian games even ran in the first place. And I think people like the rules more so than the setting.
If that was the case, then there is no case. Like if people do like rules more than settings, then there is no case that the like the like the setting the setting is the problem in terms of fantasy games. Because
The setting is important for the rules for a fantasy game. I mean, you have to explain the setting of the fantasy.
I don't think it's any more.
Mechanics.
I don't think it's any more important than in any game. Like the setting is in general a pretty damn important thing in any given game. I feel like
it's more important when the world isn't based off of the real world, though, because you have to give some frame of reference to the players.
But you can't be too you can't define it too much, because if you make it too specific, you can make the player feel like it's confined to certain tropes or nations or way the nation should work.
Yeah, I don't know. I still feel like the whole idea that people are tired of the same tropes is kind of. I just don't see it because I see a lot of the same tropes in many different games.
I don't see your point at all either.
I guess we'll have to agree to disagree then. But yeah, I feel like in terms of Arcanum in specific, I feel like it's a great world that's like distinct from other fantasies in terms of like, cause how can I say it? It's very Tolkien esque, but it's not like literally Tolkien, because like there like I don't see any like specific like good versus evil conflicts. Like all the factions seem to be very very like in a neutral zone. There's nothing good or bad about like being an orc compared to an elf compared to a dwarf, or being industrialist compared to magic. It's like there is no like difference not difference but there isn't like no preference in terms of like a duality. The Tolkien-esque like part of it is the duality of like good versus evil, and that doesn't exist in Arcanum as an example of something. It's not I don't think it's not the main point, which I feel is the biggest thing going for it. Like going for it not being exactly Tolkien like what am I trying to say? I don't think it's like as samey as a lot of other Tolkien inspired things. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
And time progressed. It's not just in medieval stasis. We're in the Industrial Revolution in this world.
Yeah, that too. Very good point.
Hey, Tony, your mic's not working again. Yes.
Is it still not working?
There you go.
We can hear you.
So going back to... Sorry, Gugo.
Alright, so, well, while I was designing the races for Arcanum, specifically tried not to, like, make them good or evil and all that. Like, I decided to leave that to the player to decide whether they'll be good or evil or whatever and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of forcing them, well, you're an orc, you're bad. That's stupid.
Yeah, the only real evil nation is TOs.
Yeah, not gonna lie.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, so like the I just tried to prevent like conflicts that would like racial and all that. Well, kind of exist, but they're more like in the general magic vs industry narrative, which well was the whole idea of the game anyway. So yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that.
SK, weren't you going to say something?
I was going to say, in response to Tia's earlier point about like Victorian era games, is I think the reason they're popular is because, at least from my experience, because that was true in NES, in that there were a lot of games that were set in like the Victoria II era. because I feel like the reason it's popular is because it's late enough that people can relate to it pretty easily, but at the same time, it's early enough that people don't have to deal with the quagmire that usually nuclear warfare. I don't know how relevant that is to the fantasy discussion, but I feel like there's definitely some truth to that. What T was saying.
Well, fair. I'll try to link the Victorian discussion and the fantasy discussion in that. Initially, well, I had tried to make the theme of the game, well, explicitly kind of Victorian, like, well, Victorian aesthetic, but not like totally Victorian and all that. But well, I made an omission while making the sign up form, and that's how we got all the weird nations right now. Um, Oops.
New Thel, best Thel.
Righto, I think that discussion ran its course.
Yeah.
All right. So the next discussion would be culture mechanics suggested by Tayo. So I think you should talk first, I guess.
1 second.
Hold on. I mean, spin, but okay.
What?
Okay, I'll just continue. Okay, so culture mechanics, right? So what I meant by that was like a lot of times we leave games like basically the culture of each country is basically completely dependent on it's pretty much completely dependent on like what the person wants to write about it, or else they like don't write about it. So I was thinking about like what about like making culture into like mechanics similar to how like they do it in like Civ and other games, where basically cultural development has a direct impact on the game's mechanics instead of like it only really having an impact on the flavor of the game and sometimes on diplomacy at the very most.
I agree. I think part of the reason is that in terms of IT, it's hard for most people to try to connect culture with the obvious military economic shit that we're typically used to.
Mm-hmm.
But
That. Go ahead.
sorry, no, I lost
That-
my train of thought.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I mean. So perhaps it would be a good idea to like start trying to make culture into more of a mechanic. And like not really like on like wholesale. Like you can still have players like like role play out their cultures and stuff, but kind of incorporate culture into a mechanic that'll like affect the game in a way that someone's writing just doesn't deliver on. And like you can do that by Fiat, but I am very against GM Fiat. So
My biggest issue with this is that this is totally abstract, even more so than most other stats usually are. How do you define a country has a lot of culture? How do you define a country doesn't have a lot of culture? Does America have a lot of culture because we have our media influence across the world? Do we have little culture because we just adapt everything else from the rest of the world and don't produce a lot of original content ourselves? I mean, how the fuck do you determine all that kind of shit?
All right. Okay, Tayo first answer.
okay, so basically like I understand that. I don't really have a solution at the moment, but I just kind of wanted to raise the discussion on it though, like because culture has a profound impact on the world, on everything, like pretty much from military to economics to like how like we go about doing anything pretty much. It's like a lot of that is like decided by our culture. So like not representing it in the way that like it should when compared to like military and like basically having something that like affects everything but then does nothing in the game, like in the game that like is trying to represent like these realities. It's kind of just a little weird.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, Tio, but it's the same point. It's just that it's just too abstract. You can't really quantify culture into a score. I mean, at the very best, you can do a stat describing your country's culture, but you can't really assign a numerical value to it. You just can't.
It does.
Yes, it kind of does. So,
Not
but that's like perhaps. Tell me what you want to say.
That I heavily disagree with making culture into stats because that's something that the player should decide and be totally left to him. Like
it can still be left to them.
Yeah, but like I don't see what you're gaining out of it. Like, yeah, culture is important, but IoT really can't simulate well how culture works so far for now, I guess. And the only way to do it is like with role play, and I think that well any other way would like fail because either you fucking hate running it every time, like how culture increase, how it decrease. I mean, I'm still covering Make's point that's too abstract, but I mean I think you should just leave it up to the players and not like to start for them. Maybe give them I think perhaps what we're doing for Arcana would be rather interesting because well, so Angst has written a novel, and not a novel but a poem, and like it's rather good. Like well, it's an interesting story and all that, and he also has music for it and stuff. So instead of like doing it with stats and saying that Angst culture influences by 5% the surrounding NPCs, we just say that well, surrounding NPCs are affected by Angst culture because well, Angst culture because he sort of designed them anyways, so it would make total sense. And in short, either we could just let players do NPCs and sort of create cultures, but or we could not and just leave it up to the players. That's pretty much what I think. Like cultures should be well, gettably used with a GM fiat. That's the only way to do it.
I disagree pretty handedly because there's an implication there, saying that basically I don't feel like there is no way to do this. I think that we just haven't really thought of a good way to do it. And saying that, like, because we haven't found a good way to do it, there is no good way to do it. It's a kind of it's kind of I don't want to say dangerous because that's taking this way too seriously, but I don't think it's a good thing to do. So a counterpoint. If we look at like something like Stellaris, the way they handle culture is basically you select some baseline, like a cultural baseline that can change depending on some factors, but that cultural baseline is basically what you're all about, and then you can advance your culture further. I'm sorry?
Are you referring to the ethos?
Yes, I am.
What the hell does the ethos have to do with anything with a culture stat? I'm sorry, but there's just nothing to. It's like apples to oranges.
I mean, I'm not talking about a culture stat really. I'm talking about culture mechanics, which are like a culture stat that like doesn't necessarily mean a culture mechanics doesn't necessarily mean you need culture stats. Just like you need something to I'm just talking about representing the culture in some way, shape, or form inside the game itself, which ethos is like that's what it does. It's a representation of your baseline culture, of like the values of your people are. That's pretty much what culture is through and through, is it not?
I feel like we are like talking about different things at this point. So
Perhaps.
Maybe.
Like I think what Meg assumed you were talking about was like the cultural development stuff from that you get from like building wonders or certain texts in Civ, which I'll say that I think there needs to be some development of things other than like like military economics, so that people have like more objectives in IT. That's a different discussion.
Okay, so basically, I'm not talking that specifically. I'm talking about more broadly. I feel like there should be representation. Like culture development is part of it, but not the whole thing. It's also like what does this culture actually do to their people right now? Not necessarily where does this culture taking this people, but what is it doing right now as we are speaking? Because that's kind of important too, and that's kind of like what ethos is in Stellaris. It is like, how does this population respond to what's happening? And I feel like...
Okay, I think I understand what you're trying to say now, and I'm going to change my argument up a bit, if that's okay.
Okay.
So before your game that you did now, the one that's based off Beyond Earth, what was the name of that game?
I know what you're talking about. Who Among Us? Yes.
Well, I didn't quite catch that, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that I thought your culture mechanics for that game were too restrictive. Like, because you put rules in place for how cultures are supposed to develop in that game and what cultures do mechanically, you make it kind of impossible for players to think outside of the box you put in for the players. Like I can it actually made me feel restricted, and I ended up not joining at all because of that.
And that's why I think we should just fiat the shit out of culture.
Like I said, I don't think just because we haven't figured it out doesn't mean that we should like stop trying to figure it out. So like, okay, like I hear
you kind of cut him off.
Oh, sorry, my bad. I didn't mean to.
I was just saying that like it was the easiest way to do it. Like I don't see any benefit to making it work like stats because honestly, champion is really easier to use in this case. Like the issue is like culture would come from RP, obviously not anywhere else. It wouldn't make any sense if it did come from somewhere else. And like so such like it could have different impacts on having like, unless you want to have 10,000 rules for like finding which interaction does what and how and why, that would be very restricting and all that. And I don't think you're suggesting that anymore, but like I still don't see any benefit to like doing all this stat work when you can just, oh god, why am I asking for that? When you could just use GM Fiat to solve it for yourself.
Because that's kind of like, GM Fiat is very subjective, so that's why I'm really against using it pretty much in the vast majority of cases, because like there is no rhyme or reason aside from the word of like the GM. Like it can be logically based, but that logic isn't like, it isn't usually supported in such a way that is that is satisfying. Like a lot of times when a GM decides to use GM Fiat, it'll result in a player getting pissed off, because like unless they do it like even the ones who are really good at it. For example, like I feel like Robert is very good at Fiat, but even then he ran into problems with players disagreeing with him, and like that like. If there is a rhyme or reason for it, i.e. mechanics, then like there is less of a basis for players to say like, "Hey, this is bull," because it has like if they join a game and they understand the rules, like they understand what they were getting into. It's like no, I'm not quite talking about like critiquing here. I'm talking about like if the rules are consistent and the player knows like how things like the player knows like how the mechanics are supposed to work, and it worked that way. They just didn't like it, and they don't really have a basis to argue against it. That's kind of like what I'm saying. Like in terms of culture, it's a similar way. I mean, like, how else can I put it?
Hey, thanks to join. By the way, I don't think you talk. So yeah, just a heads up.
What?
Thanks to join the voice channel to listen to us talking, but I don't
Oh.
think you speak.
Hey, so Tio,
Hmm.
I'm gonna fundamentally disagree with you and blow your mind doing so. I think that there isn't enough GM fiat in games. I don't think mechanics can in any way replace a single person designing a game through thematic consistency. You don't need logic or realism. You need thematic consistency because an IoT is in its basic core a collaborative story between numerous players, and the GM is the person who weaves these thread links into one story that everybody takes enjoyment out of. And yes, it's a game, but it's a game with a story.
I think we
All
just
right,
disagree fundamentally on like the like like on what IoTs are. I suppose so. Fair enough.
all right. So can I talk now?
Yes. Go ahead.
All right. So GM fiat is good for cultures because they're subjective. Like, how the fuck are you going to make rules about culture? How you decide what works and what doesn't? What's too much and what isn't? In the end, your mechanics will turn out to be GM fiat in themselves.
I I think that's kind of just like an argument against any rules in general. Like at that point, why have economic rules when you can just say, "Hey, this country like improved this much." Like there are
That's
like
It's
how
good. That's a good
IOs
point.
work.
Why have economic rules? What's the point of mechanics?
That sounds like chaos and anarchy to me.
I feel like that's kind of inconsistent for you to say because like I mean it's the same thing with like what I'm trying to say with culture like mechanics. They if there's no rhyme or reason, then I can see like there's precedent for conflict between the player and the GM, and I like my take on like this is an old and tired discussion, but my take on IoTs are like they are games, but that doesn't mean that like I don't think the whole game implication means there can't be a story. So like that's why I there's a fundamental disagreement between me and Megs, which we just noted that like we basically have different takes on what the definition of like IoTs and also games like actually like is like what they actually are. So like I said, I feel like that's just like if you're gonna go like if it's that far like where you'd say why do it because like it like what does it add and then you use those kinds of arguments like at that point like why have any kind of mechanics but I mean
It's a good question. Why
Okay,
have mechanics? What? That's. I mean, that's not obviously the topic right
can I
now.
talk
That's a
after
great
that?
topic for another week. What is the point of mechanics? Can an IoT run without mechanics? I would love to have that discussion one week.
That's
um
interesting. All
yeah
right.
sure
Okay, so I'll take a moderate position between the two and argue that, well, there is a need for mechanics and that they can be beneficial to IOTs and that in score, like, mm, well, I guess that IoTs are like a mixture between freedom and, well, restriction. What I mean is that you can't make mechanics about cultures because it's subjective, like, it's not something well defined like what's the culture, how much of it is And to be fair, I feel that it would be also cumbersome to do it and all that. And well, it's just that it's not possible. Like economics, military, that those are easily quantifiable, and we can easily control and keep track of them. But culture is a bit more well subjective, as I mentioned at least 3 times before. So for more subjective things, we just need to use GM fiat, and well, I don't see any other way to do it.
I mean, I think part of the reason that we see culture as something that's easier to GMPI is because we've never had a game that's really had culture mechanics.
Yes, exactly. That's my argument. Like just because we haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it's not possible. But anyways, we can continue on with the
Just
next one
because
because
we
I
haven't seen it doesn't mean it is possible either. Just saying.
sure, but that doesn't really say anything to the possibility.
I mean,
All right. I think we should end this discussion about
Yeah, sure.
culture mechanics and all that, and maybe have this topic like have mechanics in the end somewhere maybe next week. I don't know. Let's move on to the fourth topic. Oh, we've passed 1 hour. Well, that's nice. Game progression focus and should the game should the okay sorry should the focus of the game change? Like some GMs have preset courses for the game, maybe what they would expect out of it. And of course there's the rule sets. When should they change? Should they change just to fix something, or should they evolve? And ready, set, go.
I loved how idiot rules would change depending on what the players did. How Ninja Cow would add mechanics based off of what people would want to do. It made the game a lot more dynamic and a lot more fun. And I'm pro having rules be flexible as much as possible in order to let players have as much freedom as it's relatively realistic to have such.
Well, the reason that idiot could have so flexible rules, well, that's because it didn't have like heavy mechanics. And like for Arcanum, honestly, I would prefer that we don't touch the rule set and beyond for patching
Um,
stuff and whatnot. And like, because it's a complex rule set and it has a lot going in it and stuff. And like, we don't want to heap anything more on it. All right, that's
um, a kind of case in point, kind of like to the last point. Like funny that idiot was brought up was that Ninja Cow pretty much regretted almost all of his design decisions when making that game. Like, as far as I know, anyways, like he's like regretted pretty much like all the freeform nature of the mechanics, and wished he created a more rigid system so as to avoid a lot of the conflict that happened in that game. So I just wanted to note that like I find that kind of vaguely not really amusing, but like interesting to note. I suppose is a fine way to word it.
Tio, there's like a lot of background noise when you talk. Just want to point that out. It's kind of distracting.
Sorry, I can't really help that. My parents just got home. I thought they would be here a little later, but
well. So what do? Okay, go ahead, mate.
All right, so back on topic. I, no, sometimes I feel like a GM doesn't understand why their own game succeeds, and I think I'm sorry, Ninja. I think this is probably one of the times where I think you might be wrong. And I think that a more rigid system for Idiot would have just limited the game rather than made it better. I mean, I understand that sometimes the more chaotic nature of these freeform games can cause drama. Lord knows I was part of it, although it didn't really have anything to do with mechanics per se. But at the same point, it was just that we wouldn't have stuff like the Soviet aircraft carrier or colonies on different solar systems if NC had a rigged system in the first place, because NC couldn't have foretold all of that shit that went on. It just happened.
Well, I think that, well, for Idiot, it is fitting to have a freeform system because it was, well, very unserious and freeform game. While so I guess that the rule set needs to complement the game, and well, in this case, the flexible rule set that Idiot had was, well, fitting, as in, yeah, I'm repeating myself, but I think that a more serious game would be probably harmed by such a freeform rule set, which is decided by people. So, like, if someone tells me in Arcanum an idea like the Soviet aircraft Basil thingy, I would tell him no, and then probably try to smite his nation into the sea.
Of course, because the aircraft carrier wouldn't fit the tone of that game. But what if, say, for example, Tio's nation wanted to build some giant steampunk tanks, for instance, with their mighty industry, and they want to attack my nation for it. But there's no steampunk tanks yet. They have the technology for it, but there's no steampunk unit.
Well, that would be covered under technology anyway.
Yeah, but what if like Tio has particular designs he wants to use?
Well, he can write RP about it.
Or maybe he wants to create some sort of, I don't know, steampunk doomsday weapon.
Well, that would be as covered in tech like spoiler alert, when you advance in technology you can unlock some pretty wild stuff, but I'm not saying what. So yeah, kinda the tech trees, well, rather a free form, and we hope that players will make it up so that we don't have to be creative and think of stuff ourselves. That would be a real pain.
I mean, I guess at the same point, I just don't feel like you can possibly think of every single contingency by yourself, Tony. I mean, if that's the case, it wouldn't really be a game. It would just be one person writing a story.
Yeah, well, yes, this is why I have. Yeah, you're agreeing with me on the freeform text tree, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, but I also have reservations.
Well, I mean, I'm rather leery of, well, allowing the players to do whatever they want, and as you mentioned, will be back me on that. Like, I guess if you're going to engage into such projects, you should, well, know that they will be costly and that, well, they will be known, and that players will.
Being really cut off by something.
Um,
What the
okay,
hell was that?
I don't know either, but what I meant was like the players should, when embarking on such a project, should well know like they'll have a hard time getting to it, and maybe they should just do it the standard way. Okay.
Looks like SK disconnected.
Yeah. I have no idea what's up with him, but I guess we continue our convo or just substitute him.
Joanne, you're up.
Well, I wouldn't mind Angst Eater.
Um, I'm not really sure what to say on this. Well, like, I think that, um, I think that, like, rules should be able to be flexible to an extent. So what I mean by that is, like, I think rules should basically be designed to account for changes. So for example, I think it'd be really cool to have a rule set that would account for like the changes that would happen between like the high medieval Middle Ages and to exploration to industrialization. Like, I think it would be neat to have a rule set that.
What happened?
Oh, wait, yeah, sorry, I was pressing the wrong button. But so basically, I feel like rules should be able to kind of change, but not in the way that they are like where the rules are meaningless, pretty much. Like, um,
Yeah, like having rules for the sake of rules, like in Sonnet especially. Well, I can see it. Like, I can see what was the thought process behind Son's decisions to add those new rules, but I'm still questioning why. What is that to the game and all that? So yeah, what I mean is the rules must be done well, I guess. They shouldn't be flexible, but they shouldn't like change at the whim of one or two players. There needs to be a majority that desires those things. And like in Idiot, I had my own specific mechanic which I only used, and yes, I pretty much exploited it. And like instead, it was a cool idea and stuff, but like when you look back at it, why did he add it? I mean, beyond that, the fact it's a cool idea, and I guess that's a good enough reason for Idiot not knocking on down in your game. But
Test.
oh
yes,
god.
That
um,
was murder to my ears.
yes, say, I guess you shouldn't add mechanics for the sake of one player. Is what I'm trying to say, and you shouldn't add mechanics because you feel like you like I don't know, depends on the person, I guess. Like some perhaps thinks that the game will be better with more rules, but maybe it's not. Maybe it just makes it more complex. um
I think this might be a good time to move on.
yeah, I guess, unless you have anything else to say.
I kind of want to get to the last topic.
Oh yes, what is a GM? Banana Watch Theater time. Well, I should first talk about how they get to that topic. So, I believe we all know Crest and all that. So, while discussing GMs and jamming and IELTS, stuff like that happens often. He started throwing out
She
like, I sorry, apologies. She started to throw analogies about what exactly a GM is, and like uh well, so like she compared the GMs to civil servants that like make sure that everything is running properly. And so, well, basically the idea is of this topic is to say your opinions on what a GM should be using the best analogy possible. All right, that's it.
Um, I want to point out once again, sorry for always whoring this out. Read my essay, The Living World. I talk extensively about this topic and my opinions of what a GM should be, what a GM shouldn't be. I feel like to sum it up, the point of the GM, as I said before, is to make sure that there's a thematic consistency throughout the game, to make sure there's a rising act, a climax, a falling action, etc., etc. Like if it was just a regular story, because that's what I think IoT is, a story.
Well, agree, I guess, but like, it's not exactly a story. It's more like history. I know, well, stupid semantics, but I should know that. Well, like, players are often central figures in a history of some sort and all that and stuff. Yeah, pretty much. I'm saying the same as you. Well, I imagine that I myself, in my specific role in this current situation, I'm like more like being a co-GM for Arcanum and not a full-fledged GM. Well, I feel more like a guardian of some sort. Like I am making sure that there is, as Meg said, thematic consistency, but well, with the added benefit of not doing any actual stat, just writing. So in the end, well, yeah, I feel like a guardian of my game, and I make sure that the content is appropriate. Of course, what appropriate is, well, this may be a good discussion to have or yell at me, and that's it. I'm shutting up. Okay, go ahead.
Um, I feel like that's not a wrong interpretation. That part of the GM's job is like making sure everything is consistent and maintaining the flow of like the conflict in the world. But I think that's just kind of a piece of the pie. Like I, this again goes back to the whole idea of like why I have mechanics, but I think mechanics are very important, both in that duty to make sure things are consistent, and to kind of like create order, create some sort of like sort of like how physics are the constraining like part of our real lives. The mechanics should be a constraining part of like what's possible in a game, because like I do consider IoTs games in the same way that I would consider Stellaris a game, and like other things that we play like games. They have story, like each one has a varying degree of story and gaminess, but like they're like it's still a game. So that's kind of like what the frame of reference I'm using to like say like, hey, this requires some sort of like guideline because like part of like I mean many people have a different definition of a game like itself, but part of the mainstream definition of of a game is like having rules. So that like I believe rules is an integral part of being a GM as well. Like crafting rules, making sure that they're like they can stand to tests basically, and are fun to interact with as well.
Okay, well, I don't disagree with you, but I think you're going too far by calling, well, the rules of IoT should be like the rules of physics. And I think that's quite wrong because if rules of IoTs are like the rules of physics, well, that would be bad. I believe like they don't need to be eternal and forever. They need bug fixes, but they also need to be like giving some leeway to the player. Like, if rules of physics apply to IoTs, that would be really bad, and it shouldn't be like that. I mean, I'm repeating myself and looking like an idiot, but what I mean is like, in rules of physics, you can fly by flapping your wings, and well, in IoT, like, you should be able to do something like that, or
I
else.
think you're taking my rules of physics things a bit too literally. I was more just saying that like there are like rules are required pretty much, not like the degree of the rules. Like I wasn't arguing for the degree of rules. I was just saying that like you need a baseline.
Oh yeah, I agree with
I
that.
I don't agree with that.
It's it's
And
it's again getting into like the whole idea about like
I
like
understand
yeah.
that, Tio. I understand, but like, first of all, I just want to respond to something Tony said that I didn't really get a chance to. You were trying to say that IoT is a history rather than a story. I just want to say that history is just a real life story, at least to me. I don't really see much difference between like Shakespeare's plays and say World War II, other than the fact that World War II actually did happen, compared to like King Lear, for instance. Secondly,
Well, that's all the difference, but that's a more of philosophical debate and less for
yes, I
like
understand that.
IoT. So
Secondly, um, I see that Tio seems to take more of um, what's the word, like a clockwork master, Like the idea that the GM is here to create a sort of mechanics, a system, a sort, and then sit back and just let the mechanics produce results, which is a which is a not necessarily a wrong way to do IoT. I just don't think it's the best way to do an IoT. I
Fair
feel like
enough.
that. I feel like a GM needs to be more involved in the game. He or she needs to be in the mud. He or she needs to be seeing what the hell is going on and interpreting what the hell is going on and trying to make sure that everything has its place. And sometimes that means ignoring your own system because the the most important rule is knowing when to break your rules.
Okay, may I insert another bad analogy? Like, actually, now that I think about it and I see both of your opinions, I think I will, as per usual, take a more moderate stance and think that more GM should be more like a politician, like he's bound by certain walls, the walls of the land, but if he or she are clever enough, they can exploit them and twist them and break them in countless ways so that he can get what he wants. So, like, I guess James, a politician, and the players are. I don't know. I have no idea where it's going, but what I mean is that a GM shouldn't be a quackmaster or just a random storyteller who makes up stuff as they go. They need to be, well, both or optimal, maybe one storyteller and one clockmaker. That's why Arcanum is the best story. Apologies.
I get what you're trying to say. I think you're trying to say that there's a place for mechanics, and I know sometimes I go a little to the extreme, but I agree with you totally. There's, in some cases, places for mechanics. I know the game I want to run next has a lot of mechanics, more so than the games I usually run. But that's just because that's the type of game I want to run. I don't think it necessarily has to be run that way, but it's just the way I would want to.
Yeah, that's understandable. I guess that the type of a GM that the kind of a GM that should be, well, also depends on the game itself. Like Sun Running Idiot would be, well, it would be different. It wouldn't be Idiot. Well, to be fair, that's not saying much, but what I mean is pretty much nothing. Anyways, go on.
Yeah,
Well,
I guess we're done if nobody else has anything else to add.
yeah, anyone else?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Well, I suppose this is the end of IO Imperium Podcastium 3 Redux 3. A 3? What? No.
So when do we give Tio his own Tiberium?
I think we should edit that out.
Nope, it's going up.